Critical issue that is affecting our country, that's Nigeria's development, is what we are going to talk about now. The growing gaps and inadequacy in public infrastructure, with a special focus on the northern part of the country, talking about the northern states. Nigeria's infrastructure deficit is staggering, estimated at $100 billion over the next 6 years. The north in particular faces significant challenges like dilapidated roads, inadequate power supply, and insufficient water system hinder the economic growth, productivity, and quality of life. Joining me today, of course, to dissect this and analyze this conversation, this situation, is someone who took his time to dive into a research, a really big, humongous research that attracted about 2 books, brought out about 2 books into details of what the northern states are lacking, from Kaduna to Kano, Sokoto to Bauchi. Our discussion is going to shed a light on the complexities of Nigeria's infrastructure challenges and potential pathways forward. So get ready for this thoughtful, really provoking conversation. To do justice to this topic, of course, we have Professor Philip Akpen. He is an author and a professor of history and diplomatic studies from University of Abuja that did this amazing 2 books, like I said. Good morning, Professor.
Good
it
morning,
is a pleasure. To have you here, and also an honor to dissect into all of this. Now, first of all, Professor, you spoke about the importance of infrastructure development for the northern states, talking about Nigeria's economic growth in general. Could you elaborate a specific infrastructure project that you believe would have the most significant impact on the Nigerian economy and the northern states?
Yeah. We first and foremost, we must have to understand infrastructure from a very holistic point of view. Holistic point of view in the sense that if you take a critical look at the book starts from chapter 1 down to chapter 8, the one on modernizing northern Nigeria, discussing specific infrastructure development in the northern part of the country. But that is not just it. The issue is that we must have to understand the cruciality and the topicality of infrastructure from a general point of view. And let me take you down the history memory lane so that you will understand what we are saying. Britain that we are talking about today, that is highly developed, started with the capacity building in infrastructure development. It was infrastructure that determined their growth. It is infrastructure that determined their development. Now, when you zero that down to northern part of Nigeria, the government then, and particularly during the colonial period and the immediate post-colonial period, did fantastic job in terms of building capacity. Yes, the leadership at that time must have made some errors, must have made some mistakes, but the foundation was very excellent. And the problem is that our leaders that came much later, starting from 1979, when we got the Second Republic, from 1979 to 1983, it was aborted. But, they did excellently well. But the question one is beginning to ask today is that if you look at the infrastructures that were built by the colonial officials in the northern part of Nigeria, they are still standing, very amazing. They are standing. But what was built from the 1980s down to date, some of them are collapsing and giving way. It therefore means that, number one, we are failing to recognize the crucial role infrastructure can play, especially energy, especially power supply. We are also failing to understand the relevance of infrastructure in line with our environment. Northern Nigeria is blessed with abundance human resources and material resources. Look at the tin resources in Jos Plateau. Look at the cotton in Funtua, and then some other part of northern part of Nigeria. You will discover that we've not been able to cash in on the blessings of the environment in northern Nigeria. And of course, the issue of transportation. Look at, in those days, you can travel from Lagos to Sokoto, from Sokoto to Maiduguri with no problem, using railway, somewhere along the line you can use road and connect where you are going. And also the issue of communication. Communication fastens business. Communication bring about rapidity in terms of doing business, the way we do business. But the problem is that we have a problem. And the problem is that we have not been able to distinguish between a very good political environment from a very corrupt political environment. Yes, we have a corrupt political environment today. The resources that is expended for development is being siphoned and so on. Of course, you talk about good political environment. A good political environment can go without having corrupt practices, sharp practices, and so on and so forth. And of course, you must have a robust entrepreneurship system. In other words, we are talking about the private partnership and private participation in an economy. We have that in the northern part of Nigeria. If you go to Kano, we have the best private companies in Kano. If you go to Kaduna, we have them. But today, because government has not been able to support them, they are dwindling. They are not doing well, per se. So, what we are trying to say, and what I also did in this book, is that I presented a graphic picture of what happened in the past, especially when we got independence in 1960. Leaders such as Ahmadu Bello, leaders such as Tafawa Balewa in the northern part of Nigeria, and so many others did their best. And they did their best. Yes, there were mistakes here and there. But the question we are asking today, in line with what one author asks, is that, can the Northerners think? The Northerners have not been able to think because we've not been able to cash in on the blessings, the foundation and the blessing that was laid by Sardauna and his colleagues to build Northern Nigeria.
Now, Professor, you made mention of the fact that can the governors think, or Northerners rather. I remember when we're having a conversation on this program, and I pointed out something that has been really been confusing for Nigerians, which is, why are the governors not thinking of creating revenues, generating internal revenues? Why are they not thinking? Why is it that each time they're just waiting for the federal allocations in order to fund the state, but then nothing comes out of this state? And there was a point, a statistic that was released saying Lagos State alone generates more revenue than the 19 northern states put together. So with what we know of the history, where even when the British came in, the Northern Nigerians were the first one to welcome them. They were the first people that the British said, oh, you people were already organized based on the ranking of the, they had the district heads, they had their own people, the kings, yes. Exactly, the emirate structure. So with all of that, what would you say has been the cause of the dwindling when it comes to basic infrastructure in the northern parts of the country?
Simple. Career is no longer open to talent. Career is no longer open to talent because people that should be advising the governors are not there. The governors simply handpick the people they think they can control. They don't want people who will tell them the truth. The problem is that we must do the right thing. Let me give you an example with Sardauna. I'm not an apologist of Sardauna or Ahmadu Bello, but he did things the opposite. He did things in the right way. He chose the correct people who will work and make sure that the modernization agenda, the one not phenomenon which he pushed and pursued, will be achieved. Today, the story is different. The northern governors must understand that they have to choose people that have the egghead, people that can give them advice, people that can call it a spade, can call a spade, people who will not deceive them, people who will not make them feel good that they are doing the right thing, even though they are doing the wrong thing. Look at our rural areas. Our rural areas are supposed to be buffer areas to the urban centers. But today, the story is different. The rural areas are very, very marginalized. But if you look at in my book, what I have tried to do is that I look at the government programs, government initiatives as it affected the rural areas. Now, if you take, for example, the regime of the first civilian government, or even before then, the First Republic. Take, for example, the First Republic, before you begin to look at the series of military government that came in before 1979. You discover that there was what you call the Green Revolution, isn't it? Now, that program was targeted at upgrading and alleviating poverty at the rural areas. If you move further down to 1979 to the Second Republic, Shagari also brought out his own policies and programs in agriculture that affected not only the rural areas in the northern part of Nigeria, but the entire Nigeria. Now, when Buhari came in, policies and programs were also made. Yes, one can say that there was a lot of, a lot of, challenges with some of the programs he came out with. But the truth is that, have we been able to review what they have done in the past to see where we can improve on what they did? Babangida came in, and Babangida also introduced some programs that affected the rural areas and also the urban centers. Yes, mistakes were made, but have we been able to learn from the mistakes made from the past? Babacha came in, and so on and so forth, till down to 1999. Look at what Miriam Abacha did. Look at what Miriam Babangida did in terms of better life for rural women. Look at what they did in terms of bringing about policies and programs that will affect the rural. The government today has not been able to review, to sit down and look at what is our area of need. We talk about China today. China is developed because China has been able to identify what is their problem. You must have to identify the problem on ground before you'll be able to proffer solution to it.
Prof, do you think that is the reason why the northern part of the country seem not to be going forward? Talking about regional disparities, northern parts seem to be left behind, especially when it comes to infrastructure. Is it because they have not, been keen on understanding what northern part really need?
Yes, we must have to know, first and foremost, know what we want. What do we want?
But I'll ask you this on behalf of Nigerians.
Yes.
What do they not want?
The northerners want development. We want infrastructure. The northerners are very creative people. Northerners are very enterprising people. The northerners are people that are very kind-hearted people. I studied in the north. I went to school, ABU. I went to study at Bayero University, Kano, and I am telling you that I have interacted with people who are not even educated. Their enterprising spirit is wonderful. It's very excellent. The question we are asking is that, have they been empowered by government? Have government supported in terms of policies and programs in the rural areas, in the urban centers? The question is that, yes, they have done, but they need to do more. More need to be done in order to elevate and upgrade the standard of living of the northern Nigerian people. Not only the northern Nigerian people, but the entire Nigerian environment. So
earlier, Professor, you spoke about the private sector and how they are dwindling because the government, there seems to be a gap between, the federal government and this private sector. So what do you think are the key challenges that have been affecting the implementation of, private sector given their own quota?
When we got independence in 1960, everybody, including government, has this notion and this perception that everything must be provided by the government. So government did not popularize the issue of private sector in Nigeria. everybody doing business believe that their income can only come from doing government contract. So therefore, we started, that missing gap started right from the time we got independent. Private sector participation in business, private sector participation in political activities, private sector participation in the economy was not popularized. And that is why when Babangida came up with the issue of structural adjustment program in 1980s, it was so strange to many people that what is this kind of structural adjustment program? Why? Because we didn't understand how private sector can engineer economic growth, how private sector can engineer economic development. We didn't understand that. So the gap started right from the time we got independent in 1960. Today, look at what is happening between the Dangote, which is one of the strong private company in Nigeria, with the government. There is that conflicting, interest and so on. So we must have to empower, government must have to empower the private sector to function well. The private sector must be repositioned in order for them to do things to improve the economy of Nigeria and northern Nigeria in particular.
So what do you think should be the best strategy employed when it comes to infrastructure? Because the northern part of Nigeria, based on your research, you already know that do not have a light. There is no power. Recently, there was even the Minister of Power coming out to say, oh, we're going to fix, the power that, and until now, there are a lot of villages that have never even seen light in their life.
Electricity, yes.
Electricity, talking about even water. I know that while growing up in the northern part, we enjoyed tap water. But then right now, there is no water. You have to go to the rivers to get water in some rural areas. And this is something that keeps leading people to health hazard, talking about cholera diseases and all of that. So with everything going on, with people from the northern part not feeling the impact on the government, what is the best way to establish infrastructure, basic, in the northern part of the country?
First and foremost, like I said from the beginning of our conversation here, is that we must have to understand the critical need, the role of infrastructure before you begin to talk about building it, isn't it? First and foremost, it must be situated within the context of what we want and what we need. It must be situated within the context of what already exists. And in the northern part of Nigeria, what already exists is abundant. So we must, first and foremost, build our capacity in such a way that infrastructure will fit in. For example, take power or energy. If you give people power and energy, you will understand that they will do better. Small industries will spring up in the rural areas. During harvesting period, they will be able to use, some of these machines to harvest, and people will cultivate more, isn't it? Now, when you talk about preservation too, you need energy, you need power supply to do all those things. But in a situation whereby people harvest, people do a lot of cultivation, people bring their produce from the farm, and the best way to preserve them is not there. What is the way forward? So we must have to understand, our leaders in the north and the entire Nigeria must have to understand that the world is changing. The world is changing because you can't do things without technology. You must have to understand that technology is ruling the world. So how do we bring technology to bear on our northern economy? How do we bring technology to bear on our agriculture in the north here? How do we bring technology to bear on our fishing industry? How do you bring technology to bear on our general level of our economic system? You must have to train people. And there are so many people who are trained, very intelligent people in the northern part of Nigeria and elsewhere in Nigeria that are doing well. If you travel to Kenya, for example.
Yeah.
You will be very amazed with the way the rural areas are doing well because they have a lot. We must seek alternative. Okay. The problem we have in Nigeria is the problem of electricity generation, the problem of transmission, the problem of distribution. You see, 3 problems are affecting us. Generation, distribution, and what? Transmission. We have these 3 problems. And in a situation where you cannot generate, how can you distribute? In a situation where you cannot distribute, how can you transmit?
So it all boils down to the beginning. The beginning
yes.
is even a problem before it even reach to start getting results. Honestly, I wish we could continue this conversation because when it comes to the North, a lot has not even been touched. You know, even with the insecurity that keeps dwindling, the already great growth that
I want to say this before we round up. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you look at the same thing we are talking about, if you build a robust infrastructure program, the insecurity will disappear. Nobody will have cause to go and sit down and begin to plan evil, against the society. But because the infrastructures are not properly built and positioned, people are idle. Government must make people work. It is government that provides infrastructure to enable people to be energetic, to enable people to be mobile. The mobility of people, the mobility of our economic system depends on robust infrastructure that you build.
Indeed. Thank you so much. That was a great note to end this. Appreciate you, Professor Philip Akpen, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, with that, we will take a break. And when we come back, the show would continue. But on this topic, I would urge you all to go read more, especially make your research on Dr. Akpen's book, because you need to understand what's going on in your country in order for you to give your own quota as a citizen.